All right. Well, Georgia, thank you so much for reaching out to me. I was really excited when I did a little bit of background or background digging on you and kind of what's been going on with you for the last few months or years. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear your story. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Uh,
you for having me. I've just loved your podcast. It's been such a godsend, and listening to all the other women's stories has been amazing and so relatable. So, yeah, thank you for
oh.
having me on.
Okay, well, my first question is really what led to the ADHD diagnosis? So what was going on in your life? How long ago were you diagnosed? And, what were some of the moments that you thought maybe this is ADHD, I should look into this.
Mm. Well, the diagnosis is incredibly recent. So, I was only diagnosed a few months ago, actually, at the beginning of this year.
Hmm.
So very fresh. But it's not the time when I was diagnosed was not the first time that I had thought, this might be ADHD. Actually, the first time that I did raise it with a psychiatrist, actually, that I was seeing at the time, um, I had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and a period of depression at that time. It was a really stressful time in my life with my family. There was loads of stuff going on. This was in 2017. And at that time, I was living in Beijing in China, which I'm sure we're going to talk about at other points during this. Um, but it didn't really sit right. I thought that, yes, there's definitely some anxiety going on. I've definitely been, ups and downs, but I just don't feel that's quite capturing the situation and what I feel is going on with me. And I went and did my own research, as I think most people who come to this diagnosis do quite a bit of. And I went to the psychiatrist and I said, I've been really thinking this is ADHD. I'm like reading all this stuff and I relate to so much of it. And unfortunately, at that time, the psychiatrist kind of just laughed it off and was like, no, it's not ADHD. It's generalized anxiety disorder. You're just being anxious again. Here's an example of your anxiety playing out. I thought, oh, okay, well, must be that. And I kind of just put it aside. I still thought it. I still thought it. And then actually, over the last couple of years, again, it was kind of coming back up for me. Um, and it's just been through this real kind of constant changing in mood, constant need to be doing stuff, constant restlessness, just going through job after job, burnout after burnout, and thinking, God, this is ADHD. Like, I'm certain this is ADHD at this point. So about well, it must have been last year, I did finally get around to reaching out to my GP, and went through a kind of initial assessment process. I should say that I'm in the UK as well, so it's probably clear from my accent, but um, I'm now in London in the UK, so I'm dealing with the NHS services at this point, and I go to my GP, um, and they did the initial assessment and were like, "Oh, yeah, you need to get an assessment done." Um, Unfortunately, in the UK, getting an assessment can take at least 2 years, if not more, for a lot of people. Um, and so I kind of just thought, okay, well, I'll find out in 2 years' time. Um, Unfortunately, it came around a lot sooner. And I say unfortunately because the reason that I ended up getting my diagnosis is that I went through a really difficult time. I lost my best friend very traumatically, unexpectedly. It was really difficult. I was dealing with just immense grief. Um, I, definitely now have accepted the anxiety and depression that has come with 31 years of undiagnosed ADHD. So that was playing a part, as was the trauma. And I just went into overblown overdrive, doing, not connecting with my feelings at all, and eventually had a complete meltdown. And at that point, sought out help, ended up seeing a psychiatrist who, by pure chance and in some ways luck, ended up being an adult ADHD specialist. So when I was seeing him, I mentioned, oh, I'm on the wait list to get an assessment. I didn't know at that time that he was a specialist. I said, I'm on the wait list to get an assessment. And he said, oh, well, funny you should say that. This is my specialism. And, when you're a bit better in yourself, we can do an assessment for you. Um, Sorry, it's such a long story. It's kind of, bizarre. So please do jump in because I could talk for England, honestly. Um, so we did the assessment. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this kind of know how that goes, very kind of long interview process. And he kind of said to me, there's a few things that I'm looking out for in the inattentive, a few things that I'm looking out for in the hyperactive. And he said, you could say there's kind of 9 boxes in each that I'm looking to tick. And if you tick, 5 out of those, we would be looking at maybe giving you a diagnosis. So you tick 7 in both. So for sure, this is what's going on with you. And I don't know. I think I've heard on here and speaking with other friends that have shared their diagnosis since. Even though I had thought it for years and I was so convinced myself that that was what was going on, actually hearing it and being given that diagnosis was just huge. It was
Mm.
immense. And I'm still going through the process of processing and all the analysis that comes, all the reflecting on all the footage of your life that suddenly is available to you. Yeah, and it's just been an incredible journey since then. But I would say, that diagnosis, it was a relief. It was validating. It was a lot of amazing things, but it was also so overwhelming in a way that I didn't even, you know, expect or couldn't really expect before it happens.
Mhm.
So yeah, only a few months in, but it's a pretty long-winded story to answer just your
Uh,
first
well,
question.
no, it's fascinating because it really is, like you said, it sort of hits you in these waves, right?
Right.
Of realization, especially just going over the whole course of your life as an undiagnosed human and
Mm,
how that affected you and what your relationships were like and all of these seemingly random things that all seem to suddenly come together and connect in this very, very convenient way. And so on the one hand, it's really, really overwhelming to look back through this life, and through this new lens, it feels so profound. But then at the same
mm,
time, you're met with all of these present day questions about, oh, everybody thinks they have ADHD nowadays, so maybe it's something else. Am I misreading this? Am I making
mm,
excuses? What is and isn't ADHD, right? So I think there's like all of those questions that are also hitting us at the same
hmm
time as we're getting this diagnosis and feeling like suddenly everything makes sense, right? Like it just feels
right.
like it fits in a way that nothing else does. But then at the same time, I think so many of us deal with that feeling of like, well, um, you know, what am I just looking into the, could this be something else? And that's why I think,
Right.
like you said, like the hearing it and the validation from a professional is so important. Like I think, we often talk on this podcast, like, is a professional diagnosis important? There's such a long wait list. There's so many barriers to it. Do we
Mm,
really, really need it? And I think one of the biggest one of the biggest reasons for getting it is that validation, and still.
absolutely. I do. I think it's really right to have that discussion about, is that what's needed to, start figuring out what you need to be, how you need things to be supported and to be able to kind of accept that, what, I know myself better than anyone else. And actually, yeah, if in 2017 I had thought, what, I know this is ADHD, I don't need validation of this psychiatrist that I'm seeing, maybe, maybe that would have been a few more years with a little bit more support in place. But there is this debate going on. It's kind of annoying to even call it a debate in the
Mhm.
in the media in the UK, globally, I guess, about ADHD, people self-diagnosing on social media. And I've definitely realized that, when I've been really open in sharing my diagnosis, because for me it's been like, oh, I can explain everything. Like, yes, this is me, right? That's fine. I'm happy for other people to know because I feel like it helps me to navigate this process that I'm going through of trying to unmask, because a lot of what I've realized is that I was really good at masking for the last
Hmm.
31 years, and that's really actually problematic. And it can cause a lot of other issues. But anyway, off topic. So in the UK, there's this debate going on. And so people would ask me when I would kind of share, I did get a lot of people kind of coming back and asking me, so how did you get your diagnosis? And did you see a psychiatrist and all that stuff? And at the beginning, I was very like, I would kind of say, yes, I saw a what I told you, I saw a psychiatrist, he's actually a specialist, and this is the details, and like really sharing my business. And honestly, now I'm kind of, I feel much more in the camp of I'm it's part of me, I tell people regularly when I feel like it's necessary to the situation. I have ADHD, sorry if I interrupt, whatever it is. Um, but I don't really care if you believe it or get it, or if you just want to say, I don't believe in like medicine and science, that's fine. That's a you problem. That's that's completely a you problem. That's, so I do less kind of explaining now when I say I've got ADHD, and the question comes, how did you know? Because I have it.
Yeah, right. And I think that's something too. I hear that often from women who are diagnosed, and then they're like, how do I explain to my partner?
Hmm.
How do I explain to my family what I'm going through? And nobody believes that this is ADHD. And, people are really feeling very dubious and they don't think that this is it. How do I explain to them? And I'm always like, you don't. Like, that's, like you said, that's a them
Mm.
problem. You're not going to explain this. This is really an explanation for yourself when it comes to who you are and how you operate in this world, and it's a lot of answers for why you maybe were the way you are, and it's an opportunity to reframe a lot of that stuff. But like, yeah, in terms of acceptance or explanation, that feels like you'd be Sisyphus to really try to tackle that.
Right. And you know who the people are in your life that when they ask questions, they're really looking to discuss the information with you versus challenge, is this for real? I have had
Mm.
family members and friends that ask questions around, oh, but you were quite good in school. So how does that work out? And they're not challenging the diagnosis. They're just trying to understand, like, what does that mean? Does that mean
Right.
there's something different about your ADHD? And I'm like, well, actually, a lot of people, and I've been doing that research, and I'm like, actually, I read this here, and a lot of people have that experience, and then all of a sudden they meet a moment where it starts getting really difficult in different areas, and then I explain my own experience. And what I found is that a lot of those experiences, when I explain them, friends, family members, people that are close to me are like, oh my, what? Like, I didn't know that was going on with you. I didn't know, like, you just stopped being able to do math in GCSE year. They just didn't know, because
Mm.
I was so good at masking. And I was, spent all this years of time trying really hard in things that I was really struggling with, not understanding why, and just working 10 times as hard. And everyone's saying to me, oh, it's so you're so relaxed, you're so strong-willed and independent and all these things. I'm getting praised for masking, so then I'm just doing more masking. And so it's a lot of work to undo that stuff now.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's so beautifully said, right? And just in terms of how valid, how much social validation we get from showing up as this like competent altogether person, and
Right.
then having this, like we've talked about this before on the podcast, this like duality of our experience in terms of who we are to everybody else versus who we feel like
Hmm.
we are behind the scenes, and how yeah, right, it really is such a process of unpacking all of that and being like, what would it look like for me to just show up as my authentic self in these moments.
Mm,
Now you did a really very public unmasking, so to speak,
I
on
did.
LinkedIn in January, right? So you kind of so walk me through what happened. You decided you were leaving your role in your company, and this was you just wanted to kind of talk about the diagnosis, or what was happening with that, with the article you posted.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a little bit of time to kind of come to the decision that that's the way I wanted to go about things. I mentioned that, I was going through this very difficult period, dealing with loss and trauma and all of these different things. And was prior to that, my role was very public. I was a very vocal person, often spokesperson for my company. I was writing a lot, doing a lot of events, podcasts as well in my place of my space of work. So I work in sustainable transport, and I've done that in a number of companies in a number of roles for the last 6 years, and I've really it's an area of work well, actually, my work is where I've landed now is one of those things where I feel like, you know what, pat myself on the back. I actually really did do something positively there because I followed my passions and I followed my skills into something that I genuinely love to do. So I was this very kind of visible person in my industry. And so me going just completely silent at the end of last year and not saying anything for about 3, 4 months didn't fly under the radar. I had a very full inbox, loads of messages on LinkedIn, all this work stuff. And my company at the time was so helpful, so understanding, really supportive, as I was going through the process of kind of the self work that I needed to do at that time and just the support and peace that I needed. Um, and it was a very, I was in a fairly senior role. I was general manager for the UK and Ireland for like the largest micromobility operator. So it was very kind of high pressure job, which I was not able to do at that time. So I stepped back and they were very supportive. But as I started kind of coming back to myself and getting the support I needed, I had had the diagnosis. I was doing a lot of kind of self work and really thinking about how am I going to go forward now. And I knew that I wanted to continue going forward in this industry, in this world of sustainable transport. I knew that still felt that I had something to give and something positive to add. And so then I was thinking about, okay, how do I step back in a way that is genuine, that is authentic, that isn't just brushing this all under the carpet and acting like nothing happened and having to just keep masking all of this stuff. And so that's where I started kind of writing things down. And at the beginning, when I started writing, I didn't have any intention of sharing it publicly. It was just like writing down thoughts, what's happened, what do I want to change, what do I want to do, how am I going to go about it? And as I started writing it down, it felt like, okay, actually, maybe this is the way that I can just move forward. I can put this out there, and that's almost like a line in the sand of this is who I am, this is what's happened, here's how I'm going to go forward. And it also was an opportunity for me to put in a boundary, which was quite a new thing that I was learning how to do, and say, I'm not going to be working, even though I ended up working, but I said, I'm not going to be working for the next 3 months. I'm going to be exploring this area of the industry that I love. I'm going to be speaking to friends and colleagues about, how I might continue to go forward. But for the next, I kind of said when I put this article out, I'm going to have this time in the next 3 months. So I'm not going to be as responsive, and wanted to give myself some more space and not having that anxiety of just the inbox is getting fuller and the messages keep coming.
Mhm.
So yeah, I put out this article that explained all of this, and somewhat kind of jokingly called it Mask Off, which was quite fun. And I shared it with my partner and my mum and my sister and some friends as well and actually my former boss, and before I put it public, and just got feedback from people like, is this oversharing? Is this too much? Is this okay? Like, what do you think? What are your opinions on this? And nobody gave me any edits. It was unedited, all my words, all my thoughts, and I just put it out there. Um, and the response has been incredible, and I'm so glad that I did it. Because it does feel like I can now step into conversations with people who maybe saw me in a really different light before that and say, this is what I need. Actually, by the way, I'm really sorry. I'm going to make notes the whole time because I need to do that to feel like I'm catching things or whatever it is. I feel confident being able to ask for what I need. Um, and the response I had was unreal. I mean, so many people came back to me like, I've been thinking I might have ADHD. I do have ADHD. My kids have ADHD. Um, just I recognize those patterns, and this is a really hard industry to work in sometimes. And just this real openness and huge amount of support from my network that also, again, was really validating of I have done some things well, despite not knowing this diagnosis. I have navigated a place of work and made real connections with people on this shared interest. And people they do see this kind of authentic me, even if there's little bits that I'm masking here and there, they do see the genuine passion that I have for this space. And so that was really wonderful. I did have one annoying response, I have to say. And it was so annoying. And it was from, I hope he's not listening to this because he knows who he is, but it was from this
I have
guy.
a feeling he's not my demographic, but
Yeah, no, this is true. I actually do not think he's listening to this, so we're gonna full on drag him right now. No, I'm joking. But he has ADHD, this gentleman. He works in the cycling industry, similar to myself, and we've crossed paths before. And it's all been very cordial and fine. And he kind of he just did this thing of like projecting his anxieties onto me. And he said, what he said was, he said, "Oh, like you should be aware that oversharing is actually a symptom of ADHD, and you might want to reflect on whether it was a good idea for you to share your diagnosis in a professional setting, because who do you think companies will want to hire, Georgia?" Oh, in fact, he said, who do you think companies will want to give that £20,000 budget to? Is it going to be Georgia, or is it going to be Georgia with ADHD? And my first reaction was just rage, obviously. I was like, don't tell me what to do, first of all. But I thought, okay, reflect on it. Don't respond immediately. Think about like why that's come back. This is his own anxieties. I really spent a bit of time before I replied. And I just said, like, I actually do have quite a bit of experience of what it is to be in an underrepresented group or demographic in this industry. I'm a Black woman. I've been working in this space for a long time. I'm usually one of one. So I have some experience being other. I'm pretty fine with it. And to be honest, if that's the decision making that a company is taking, that rather than my experience with budgets 10 times the size of that, then I don't want that job. So thank you for your advice, but also no thank you, and never speak to me again, please. So it's like the only one, it was so annoying that it had to come from someone else with ADHD, but it was just like, you don't know my experience. I don't know your experience. Thank you for your opinion, but keep it for yourself.
Right. But it does, really does speak to that fear. And like you said, that anxiety about how it is, needing to show up as somebody who is flawless, right? And
Right.
that's what we're talking about with masking, which is like, how do we accept in ourselves that we can be vulnerable, we can struggle, we can struggle with mental health, we can struggle with burnout, we can struggle with boundaries. These are things that many of us struggle with, and it doesn't make us any less competent and extraordinary at what we do, right? And how can we
Right,
be both
exactly.
of these things simultaneously, as opposed to
Hmm.
feeling like we are somehow, that vulnerability is somehow a fault in industries. And so, and I
Mm.
think it's a conversation we have a lot on this podcast about like ADHD and being a superpower, and that the toxic positivity about, refusing to acknowledge that ADHD comes with a lot of very nuanced,
Hmm.
traits, and I don't even want to just keep saying struggles, because I think a lot of it is really just it's part of who we are. It's part of that fabric. And but I think there, I can see why somebody with ADHD would fear that, like, pulling back that curtain is somehow
Yes,
going to, reflect on, how we're accepted in society, right? Sort of same with parents who are
totally.
afraid to diagnose their kids because they're worried that they're going to be treated
Hmm.
differently and all of that. Yeah.
Hmm. And I had that fear. Like, let's be real, I wasn't just fearless, post the thing and everything's gonna be fine and nobody's gonna make any judgments. But I accepted it. I thought, okay, I am afraid. People, for sure, the people that are judging this and thinking, oh, I don't really believe, or whatever it is, whatever they're thinking, negative things that they're thinking, are not the people that are sending me messages. So I don't need to I don't need to deal with those people. And I kind of
Mhm.
thought that through and thought, you know, how do I want to go forward? Was I want to go forward with people in my life who have genuine relationships with me, who I have real conversations with, real connections with. And if this is a way that I'm going to be able to like draw that line in the sand, and anyone who doesn't want to come over this crazy journey with me, then that's fine. I will see you later, like,
Yeah.
and there was fear there, but yeah, there was an acceptance that I have faith that it will be better for me to just push through that fear. And I think I actually wrote that in the article in the end, saying like, this is scary, like, but I'm pushing myself through the fear of this because I need to do this. And
Hmm.
that's really how I felt about it at the time. And
Yeah.
now,
So, in true ADHD fashion, you decided to take some time off and accidentally founded a new business instead of instead of taking time off.
it's so funny because it sounds like a joke, but that's legitimately what happened.
I know. I was
Like,
like
oh
piecing.
no, I accidentally started a whole business. Like,
I know, right?
yeah, that's really what happened. It's pretty bizarre.
So tell
But
me a little bit more about Loud Mobility, and how, what is the organization, and also how do you feel like you're kind of going at things differently now, having founded this with this new lens about yourself?
yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible process. Yeah, I mean, where to start? I said I was going to take this 3 month career break, I called it. I said, I'm just gonna, chat with friends and colleagues and, people in my network about what I might do next. And I said this thing of I might not be as responsive, but if you fancy a cuppa and a walk or a bike ride, whatever, like let me know. So quite a lot of people did let me know, which was great. And I ended up just having a few months of just really amazing conversations with really interesting people. Um, and I thought, oh God, how do I make this a job? So, because I was like, I'm just loving this. Like, I'm talking about stuff that I really care about. I'm connecting with people that share the desire to do something in this area. And I was starting to see that I was able to have these conversations with people because of that vulnerability that I had shown, because of that honesty. And I was having discussions with really senior people in transport, in the cycling space, in the third sector, the private sector, the public sector, every walk of life. And a lot of those conversations would end up steering around and steering towards even this kind of missing piece that was there in the micromobility, sustainable transport space even. So what it was, and throughout my career, I've been very vocal about the industry needing to do better about inclusion, accessibility, equity. It's been an area that I've spoken about a lot. I have no credentials in DEI other than my lived experience and often being the only person in the room speaking to these things.
Mhm.
But I do have an incredible network of really incredibly experienced people, researchers, policymakers, all sorts that really do have incredibly rich experience. But the missing piece that there often is for those big missions and the things that you really need huge amount of support and really kind of high level strategy to achieve the big mission stuff. Like, how do you make the transport sector more sustainable, more inclusive? It's not in the private sector alone, it's not in the public sector alone, not in the third sector alone. And if they're all doing different things, it's happening way slower than it needs to. What you need is all sectors working collaboratively towards these bigger picture missions, all shared value creators, and like pushing these bigger picture things forward. And in my career in the last 6 years, all of the roles that I've been in have required a lot of collaboration across all of those sectors, working with local governments, national governments, the Department for Transport. Internationally, I've been doing this as well because for a lot of my career, I wasn't just kind of fully focused on the UK and Ireland, but more recently, I've been very focused on the UK and Ireland. So really growing that localized knowledge. Um, and so I thought, okay, well, I can do that. I can be a translator and help for those cross-sector projects where there's loads of stakeholders involved and it's really complicated. But success for the project is one of these bigger picture missions of how do we get more people cycling? How do we get more demographics of people cycling and active and, accessing green spaces and these bigger picture things. So, and there are a lot of projects, like it sounds made up, but there is so much work in that space that just needs people who are really energetic and really really passionate about seeing that end result come about. And so as I started kind of getting into more of those conversations with people, these projects and real work started to materialize that fit into those categories. So currently my main project that I'm working on, so I'm working with a charity, incredible charity called World Bicycle Relief. Now they provide bikes to people in rural communities across largely the African continent and Latin America, um, also largely to women, girls, and it's usually for access to education, access to healthcare, to community. They also train mechanics um, to, really actually establish that ecosystem at a local level and not have that kind of saviorism that happens in some charities that are working in those continents. And they're really doing some incredible work. And they have secured an official partnership with one of the largest cycling events internationally that's happening this year, the UCI Cycling World Championships, which also is happening in Scotland. And the Scottish government are investing 40 million into this. It's a huge tourism aspect. It's happening in cities all over Scotland. So it's exactly the type of project. There's a huge number of stakeholders. It's public, private, and third sector. And the whole mission that we're working towards in delivering this project is putting out this message and awareness of the power of the bike and saying, look, all of you, all of this huge amount of people that follow cycling sport and believe in the power of the bike and recognize how impactful it can be, also look at how impactful it can be in access to education, in transport, in healthcare, in really changing the world in so many ways, and tap into that market as well, to like really see the bigger picture of the power of the bike and get involved in that bigger picture of moving society, moving that cultural, social shift towards, a little bit more positivity about cyclists, which I think we could definitely use in the UK and in most places. So yeah, it's that type of work. That's one of the bigger projects that I'm doing at the moment. But I have ambitions for where I'd like to take Loud Mobility in the next few years. At the moment, it's a one-woman show, but it won't stay that way for long. And a lot of really cool partnerships and collaborations that I'm kind of working on behind the scenes with friends as well. So it's been incredible. But I'm saying this and I'm like, it sounds like, oh my gosh, crazy amounts of work. But actually, I've really taken a very conscious step to balance my work, that work-life balance. I was never very good at that. And I'm really working on getting that better as well. So actually working on more of a freelance project basis at the moment and being able to work on my own time scale. And when my brain switches on, I can work and that's fine. And when it's not, I can sit and have a cup of tea in the garden and that's fine. It's that in itself has been a game changer. I'm just so much happier as a person because I don't have to sit 9 to 5 in a location, which normally I'm just going to be hyper focused for that entire time. And I haven't eaten and I haven't gone to the bathroom and I end the day just like empty. I've brought a lot more balance into my life. And the one thing that I'm promising myself I won't give up is that I no longer work on Mondays. And if I never work on a Monday again, I will be a happy person.
Right. That was so fascinating too. I mean, it's just such an interesting world, and I think it's such important work too. And I think it's been really interesting to think about like advocacy and following something that we're really really passionate about, but like what are the boundaries that we can keep in place so that we don't end up in a place of burnout. And it was so like you said, like feeling like you're empty at the end of the day. And I found too, like I hit burnout with my own career, just being so excited about wanting to say yes to everything.
Right.
And it was a real interesting and eye-opening experience for me when I did kind of have a moment of where I had like a health crisis as a result of the burnout, and I had to stop everything. And like I've been practicing saying no to so many more things, and feeling like by saying no to things, I'm actually being like much more productive. Like I feel like I'm actually experiencing and accomplishing so much more the more I say no to other things. And I'm like, it's so addictive. It's becoming really addictive
It feels good.
Yeah, it feels really
It
good.
genuinely feels good. And it's like, oh my gosh, why haven't I been doing this? It's like, what on earth? And I will say, like, freelancing and working on a project in that or running your own business, it is a little bit of like danger zone. You can really easily just get completely, that's all you do the whole time. But I do think it also gives you maybe a little bit of that capacity to say no, because I've had, and this is a common experience for women of color in any industry. I like, there's a lot of people nodding their heads before I'm even saying what I'm about to say, but a lot of people will approach me with, can you work on X, Y, and Z? And I say, sure, here are my rates. And they're like, oh, no, we thought, that blah, 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 or whatever, right? Basically, they don't want to pay me.
Right.
And when when you realize when you're running your own business and you are freelancing, you have that connection between your time that you give away for free as time that you're not getting paid for. And so when I was in a job full time, I'm getting paid that to, work somewhere week after week. And I say yes to do something for free, like write an article or go to an event or speak on a panel. That's fine because someone is paying for that time. My company are paying for that time and I'm doing something valuable for the company, so it's fine. But when I'm working for myself and somebody asks me to do something for free, that's time that I can't get paid for doing something else. So you actually get this a little bit more connection between how much you're saying yes to things that you're not necessarily actually getting value back into your business or into yourself, and it gives you just another layer of analysis. Like, actually, I really do have value for my time.
Mhm.
Here's what it is. It's written very clearly. It's the same for everyone. And, if that's not within reach for you, then that's fine. Maybe we won't work together on this one thing. Um, and of course, there's flexibility because when there are, things that you want to put your heart and soul into because you really do care about them, that might be lower on the scale of, I want to be able to like take up a paid project instead of this
Yeah.
because you believe in what you're doing. But, most of the time when people approach you to do something for free, it doesn't necessarily fall into that bucket anyway.
True. Now
The
I
stuff
want
I want to do for free, I do myself. I
to,
choose
right?
to do that stuff anyway.
Exactly. Now I want to backtrack a little bit and ask you about, looking back over the course of your life, because as we often do, were there some things from either from your childhood or maybe, ending up in Beijing or some of those things where you're sort of like, oh, the signs were so clearly there all along.
Yeah. I'm trying so hard not to laugh because it's like my whole life.
Right?
Honestly, it's it's just insane. And that was the overwhelm that we were talking about because I had that moment of like relief and validation, and then it was almost like the next couple of days after getting the diagnosis, I was flooded with memories, all these thoughts of all of these different situations that I was like, oh my God, what? Like that is so clearly like what the hell? It was just
Hmm.
this constant thing. And it almost felt like as well that it kind of unlocked a part of my brain that I don't know if I buried stuff in there or if I just wasn't understanding it, therefore I didn't like reapproach it or what the situation was. But even like memories that I probably didn't remember before suddenly started resurfacing. So it's almost like all of this footage that I was having to scroll through and go through and kind of analyze again. And it really has been everything. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm still going through that process now of sifting through, my experiences and where it has affected me in the past. And this is both positive and negative as well. Like I should say that I think I mentioned, I have been able to look back on my career and be like, do you know what? You made some good choices. You chose to leave things at the right time. You chose to follow interests, and that's put you into a place of, really being happy in your career, and feeling supported and confident about starting your own business in this direction. So that's a great thing. And I can reflect on some of the ways that ADHD has played a very big role in me moving in that direction. But then also, yeah, there's stuff that's just like, whoa, that was a meltdown. Like I can now accept and take responsibility for that instead of just not understanding it and being like, oh, just forget about it, just pretend it never happened, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so there's a lot of that you're going through, and you, I look back on my childhood, and in fact, even when I did the assessment, one of the questions was about, your child. You talk a lot about your childhood, and I said, oh, I don't really remember that much. And apparently, a lot of people say this. They're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I just like don't really remember. I was like, I think I remember being like 8 or something. Like, I don't really know. I just I'm not sure what's really a memory or just what I've been told. Like, my memory of my child is very poor,
Yeah.
but stuff has been coming back, and it's stuff like, oh, I don't know if you ha had this, but when you're in primary school and elementary, you have these like trays where you put your work and it has your name on, and
Mhm.
everybody has their tray. And everybody else's tray was always just nice and neat and tidy. And mine was just overflowing all the time. There was just stuff like falling out of my tray. And it was this thing where, the teacher would be like, Georgia, like, why just tidy up the tray? And I was just thinking like, oh, but I've done loads of work. So it's fine. It's great. Like I feel good about my tray. I don't understand why it's a problem that my tray is overflowing. But then, over time, if the more somebody's like, can you tidy your tray? Can you tidy? Then you take on shame for it. Where before I was like proud of this full tray and, all this work I've produced without having to be asked for it. So yeah, I mean, that stuff starts coming up. There was a period in my life, I must have been about 10 or 11 years old. And I've told people about this before, and now I'm even laughing, like, how could I've gone under the radar where I just had this overwhelming urge to cartwheel all the time. And I remembered like trying to do a cartwheel like in the middle of a zebra crossing when walking home, and people around me just being like, what is this child doing? And the worst part is I didn't even know how to do a cartwheel, so it wasn't a good one. It was just like all over the place. And so that stuff is coming back. And that for me is a little bit of a double-edged sword because they're kind of funny memories, but then people say that a lot of girls and women fly under the radar because they tend to be inattentive. And I'm like, I was so hyperactive. If I was a boy, for sure I would have had a diagnosis, like for
Mhm.
sure. There's no way. And I'm so confident in that. Um, and so it does then bring up all of that, what ifs? Could things have been different? Blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff that you still, you have to work through. So there's a lot of that. Yeah, even other stuff like that hyperactive stuff where I would be in school and at the end of the day, I would be walking home with friends. And because I've been masking and repressing and trying not to fidget all day, I would like run up the hill, this huge hill on the way home, run up to the top just to like get this burst of energy out and then wait for them. And they were like, you're so weird. Like, why do you always do that? And like, I don't know. I just think I need to run and then I run. It's just little things like that that
Mhm.
are just dead giveaways. Um, so that's been really funny. And then even just every stage of my life, I'm like, well, there's big giveaways, through university. I studied a subject that I really enjoyed. I studied philosophy. It wasn't my best subject, but it was the most interesting, which again, great choice. Pat yourself on the back because you did enjoy your degree, because you picked something that you cared about and that was interesting. But I hated seminars and I didn't know why. They gave me crazy anxiety to the point that years after university, I was having nightmares about seminars and missing seminars or being in seminars because I wouldn't go and then I would feel bad about not going because I didn't know why I wasn't going. It's just stuff like that. Um, it's it's everywhere. It's everything. It's all my experiences. It's showed up in some way. And so when you're going through all these years of footage, it's like even where there's those good bits and you can say, oh, you made a great choice and it worked out for you in this way, there's still probably something there as well when you're struggling and you didn't know why and trying to navigate the world through completely the wrong lens. Um, and that was the big thing that I think I said to friends and family after getting the diagnosis. They were like, no, how has it felt? And it's felt like I've been walking through life up until this point with just completely the wrong lens and looking at myself through what I think other people see and think of me because I haven't been able to understand how to understand myself. But then getting the diagnosis was like all of a sudden being given the right lens. And it's not only like going forward with the right lens and being able to understand yourself, how you're moving forward in life, but it's also looking back and being like, I actually see now what was going on. And with that, that gave me a capacity for self-compassion that I didn't even realize I didn't have
Mm.
until I suddenly had this ability to be like, you know what, that was hard for you. Like that was really tough. What that was like really difficult and you survived and you did your best and just that level of self-compassion that I've never experienced. That has been amazing to be able to, now have that in my life. And I think, that's something that's so big for a lot of people getting their diagnosis that it allows you to accept and it allows you to have that compassion.
Oh, beautifully said. I think, it feels like so often we're just treading water madly, and so we don't have the opportunity to evaluate those and have and stop and ask ourselves those questions of, am I struggling? How much am I
Mm,
struggling? And it is, yeah, when, like you said, when we do get that diagnosis, it's really this opportunity to say, oh, I'm seeing this through this different lens. And yeah, like wow,
Mm.
you really did work hard. Like I remember I've shared this story on the podcast before, but when I was getting my diagnosis and was talking to my doctor about all of the elaborate systems that I had in place so that I wasn't late and so that I didn't lose things, and like all of these stereotypes about ADHD, that I was
Yeah.
like, no, that is not a problem for me because I do all of these things to avoid it. And she was like, you work really, really hard to just show up. And I was moved, I wanted to cry in that moment because I hadn't really thought about how hard I had been working in all of these ways,
Hmm.
right? And it's because we're just treading water so much. And I think what is so frustrating, because so many of us are diagnosed with depression and or anxiety before ADHD. What is so frustrating about those diagnoses is, the experience that you had with the psychiatrist, which is like, no, it's just anxiety. And there's no,
Hmm.
like, well, where is it coming from? What is causing it, right? Like, it's not like we just caught anxiety like you catch the
Right.
flu. But it's
So
presented to
true.
us in this like explanation of just being like,
Right.
no, you just have anxiety. And then it's so aggressively unhelpful that like we end up
Yeah.
even more upset and frustrated and anxious about like, okay, well, now what do I do? And so it really is so
Right.
much of that, like working backwards and unpacking all of this and really, that the grief of saying like, wow, like
Hmm.
acknowledging, how hard we were working and then being able to say, okay, now what, how do I help myself now? How do I acknowledge that? And how do I
Hmm.
have that grace moving forward? And then that's, and I think like we were saying, like, that's when you're able to really kind of start leaning into some really the powerful things about having an ADHD brain and going after and accidentally starting new businesses and all of the like crazy awesome parts about it, but being able to do it with a sense of balance and awareness so that we're
Right.
not constantly in this cycle of burnout. So
Right.
yeah.
And I think it's so true what you said about kind of the the repercussions of having the other diagnoses without the ADHD context, and how much more that can kind of compound the other diagnoses. Because
Mhm.
I think what I've reflected on in that is when I've always felt like I couldn't really accept those diagnoses before because I felt like it wasn't quite right. And I'm like, there's something else wrong with me. And I don't know. I can't accept it fully. Therefore, you can't really work on recovery fully either. And
Mhm.
with the wrong lens as well, on top of that, when you are going through things like therapy, I did CBT therapy, I did all kinds of different stuff. I was trying different things, but it never felt like it just never really hit because I wasn't doing it through the right lens. It was almost like I was going through the motions of what I thought the therapy should be for someone with a non-ADHD brain who has anxiety and depression. So I was kind of just like going through the motions, but it just never really hit. It didn't actually touch the sides because it missed this entire context of the ADHD. And then now, when I've been doing therapy, all different kinds, one-on-one, group therapy, did all these different things, when I hear something that I'm like, actually, for me, distraction isn't a great technique because I'm already quite good at that, and that tends to be some. Do you know, like, and I can kind of self-advocate and be like, I don't know if distraction is for me, and oh, you know what, you're right. Like, this is probably not the best one for you, but actually, here's a different coping skill that you can use. It's a completely different approach when you have the right context. You can, accept also these I think you've said this as well before, just like horrible word, comorbidities or whatever.
Yeah.
You can accept them in a different
Well,
way when you understand how they're connected with the ADHD.
Well, and you're also empowered when you realize that you are not the problem, that it's the approach or the system or something is not working for you, but you are not
Mm.
fundamentally the problem, then you can say, this actually doesn't work for me, as opposed to
Right,
like, oh, I have to work harder, I have to try harder, what's wrong with
right.
me that this isn't working? You can just
Yeah.
immediately be like, nope, that's not going to work. Tried that.
And
Let's
then
try
keep
something else.
internalizing that I'm broken, something's wrong with me, instead
Yeah.
of being able to have the language and context to advocate for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I know. I mean, one of the things that drove me crazy about my having depression, anxiety and depression diagnosis for so many years was feeling like, what's wrong with me that I insist on constantly being depressed when I'm like, I
Mm,
have a good life, I've got great kids and a great marriage, and like, why am I so depressed all the time? And I used to feel like that was one more thing I had failed at
right.
was
Oh,
like,
gosh, yeah.
so yeah, it's so important to have that like ADHD knowledge and the ADHD affirming approaches to how we even deal with
Mm,
therapy, right? Yeah.
mm.
Oh my goodness. So wow, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. And now
Likewise.
I always like to ask if you could rename ADHD to something else. Would you call it? Do you have something else you would call it?
Okay, so I knew you were going to ask me this, and I honestly have been like, I can't stop thinking about like what would this be? I've come up with so many things, it's ridiculous. But I just first of all tried not to make like a really dark or joke about it or something. Like, um, I think my family, like in general, my sister in particular, and I, we tend to our approach to acceptance of periods of poor mental health is just like humor and
Yeah.
just really laughing about the craziest stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to be thoughtful and reflective. So I would probably get rid of all the pathologizing just generally and just be like, it doesn't really need to have a name because we live in a society where people have different brains. There
Mhm.
is not a reality of a normal brain that we're somehow missing the mark on. Like, people have different hair, people have different skin colors, and also people have different brains. Surprise, surprise. Like, it's like, does it need to be that crazy? I would probably just change. That's like a lot easier. Just change society instead of the name of ADHD. So that's like my first thought.
Uh,
Um,
the easy route.
but yeah, exactly. But to be fair, it is connected with some of the space that I work in because I've learned a lot about the social model of disability, and I would encourage everyone with neurodiversities, various disabilities. Um, I fully kind of my ADHD is my disability. I had said to a friend before I posted that article actually that I'm so excited. I'm announcing my disability tomorrow. So she told me that was the most ADHD thing I'd ever said. Um, but no, the social model is that we're disabled by the society around
Yeah.
us not providing a space where we can be able able as anybody else. So it's the
Mhm.
societal aspect. So that's kind of my head goes that way immediately. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, and then I just would go back to humor of like, I don't know, like crisis disorder or creativity disorder or like sorry I'm late syndrome or something like sorry I forgot syndrome. I don't know, like I just been cracking up about those ones for like the last however many weeks of just stuff that will pop into my head like that's hilarious. So I've like got a whole list of those in my phone, so I'll send those to you later. But yeah, I just think yeah, change society, don't change ADHD. It's actually great.
Uh, perfectly said, right? I don't know. I wanted to come up with a post of like all of the weird phrases that we've Googled before getting an ADHD diagnosis. Like,
Oh no,
of like,
please.
why do I
Like
forget things all the
nobody needs
time?
to
Or,
see that. Like
but I feel
that
like,
needs to lock and key. Nobody's ever seeing that from like if somebody was to see my Google search history, that would be incredibly distressing. Honestly, it's not for public consumption.
maybe we should just call it like multiple calendars and planners syndrome or
Oh,
something. But yeah.
yeah, yeah. Paper everywhere disease. I don't know. I'm
Uh,
saying this with like paper all over my
I know,
floor right
right?
now.
Yeah.
So it's like but yeah, and there's
Awesome.
there's loads of funny ones, and I feel like that's cool. Just like, what's the point? Why does it need a name?
Yeah, right. Someday, maybe someday. Um,
Mm. Although I would, the only thing actually, I'm like joking about it, but I would say I think it was really helpful for me getting that diagnosis because the diagnosis allowed me to access the care, support, structure, also medication that I needed. And I think when you need something more to be able to, manage life in a way that works for you, then a diagnosis can be helpful. If you don't need a diagnosis, you don't have to get one.
Hmm.
That's totally fine. You can just, if you feel like you've got the right coping mechanisms in place, you've got the right support in place, medication is not for everyone, then like, do you need a diagnosis? Like, probably not. So that's all I would say about it. Like, having a name for me, giving it a name has helped. Um, ADHD comes with all kinds of assumptions and whatever. I don't really care. The main thing it's done for me getting that name of ADHD is unlocking the right support. And so
Right.
I'm happy to, I've got ADHD, I'm disabled, still the same person.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, and that's why I love to ask the question, because I'm like, I don't have an answer, but I'm always, I'm fascinated by that
Right.
discussion of like, it is in many ways calling it a disability is important.
Hmm.
But at the same time, is it also pathologizing? And, there's so many questions around that. It just, attention deficit is such a terrible name, but,
No.
what would be
I
a
feel like it's
better
just
name
like
that many of us would have related
attention
to?
regulation would be more accurate,
But
right?
what
Because it's not
I,
like we're missing attention. It's
but
just
I was
like
going to say, like, I
difficulties
don't.
regulating it. I don't know.
But that's not what
Not even
led
quite
me
it.
to the diagnosis, right? Like I wasn't like
No.
I have an attention issue. Well, I think it was more of a focus issue than anything else. But like, I'm always trying to think about like what are some of the ways in which we really have that like, oh, okay, this all makes
Mm.
sense moment. Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway.
I definitely saw the we can see when you're suddenly thinking about something else in your head and not part of the conversation anymore in many 360 reviews in former companies. So I was like, oh my gosh, they can see.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Georgia. It's been wonderful hearing your
Thank you.
story and this kind of phoenix rebirth. I think with loud mobility, it often feels like that for me. I think with this diagnosis and this experience is
Mm,
that I sometimes joke where I'm like, we never come to these diagnoses because we're like, everything in our life is going great. I want a name for this
right.
wonderful superpower. Usually we have a real, really serious, difficult catalyst that brings us to this
Mm.
point of self-discovery. And so, yeah, I feel like I'm so excited to follow Loud Mobility and some of the amazing work that you're doing. And
Oh,
so the
thank you.
website is loudmobility.co.uk. Is there anything else, anywhere else that people can find you on Instagram?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on LinkedIn. I mean, like, I love talking to people. I'm all about people, so that's great. And I'm certainly incorporating my ADHD just need to do a million different things at the same time. I've just like this headband is actually Loud Mobility. It
Oh,
says
cool.
my motto, which is never sit still, which is very accurate. I feel
Well,
like it's
that's the
like
name. That's the name we
I'm
need, right?
embracing, I'm embracing this constant motion that has been in my life, and it's very relevant for the mobility industry. So yeah, I've got all my merch coming on there, new stuff to drop soon, of course. Um,
Never sit still. Well,
but
I
it's
feel
only
like
like I just like, just do whatever you feel like doing, and it's been really nice to be exploring that. So yeah, Loud Mobility, you can find me all over, but also Georgia Yexley, you can find me as
awesome.
just me as well.
Well, I'll have links to all of that. Now I sort of feel like maybe Loud Mobility is a good candidate for what to call ADHD.
Oh my
Right?
gosh. Yes. I love that. I'm just like, love that. Yeah.
We'll have to think of some ways to fill in loud as an acronym, but I think it sums up the
Well,
situation pretty well.
yeah. And I mean, I used loud mobility because it was also reclaiming this kind of label that was attached to me forever of, being loud and talkative and I think,
Right?
yeah, I am loud.
Well, I feel
That's what
that
I'm
way
here
about the
for.
term oversharing. So for whoever that was on LinkedIn who called it oversharing, I'm like, there's no such thing as oversharing. Uh,
I was like, don't read it then. Like, I mean, like, why did you read it? You don't have to read it.
I know,
So
right?
weird, but still.
Well, thanks again. It's been really lovely getting to chat with
Yeah,
you and
I really
hearing your
appreciate it.
story.
It's been so nice talking with you. And thank you so much for your podcast and all of the other women that have shared their stories. I mean, it really has been a really important part of this recovery and processing, understanding journey for me. It's been really wonderful to listen to everyone else. So huge thanks to everybody that came before this.
Oh, thank you.